Bitcoin conference in Miami. Store of value is going to change. Stablecoin, mass adopter of blockchain technology, EVs that own pieces of the capital stack. Yielding assets slows down. This is where DeFi has an opportunity to take a
blockchain is the thing that will revolutionize finance. When do you think this hit you? Patrick, how are you? Thank you so much for making the time today. It's a pleasure having you on my podcast.
Hey, what a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, just to kick it off, tell me about your background and how do you transition from traditional finance to pure blockchain fintech companies?
Sure, absolutely. So, I worked at Raymond James at Bear Stearns in the 90s, started my own investment bank, ran that for about 14 years. In a very small part of the credit markets, we were the globally dominant player. I sold that business and was CIO of a university, which is less fun than it sounds. So I left and I was running private equity for a Fortune 400 family. And our thought was over-regulation was going to cause a decentralization of traditional bank functions. And as we looked at that, we said we thought the markets would form around not geography or regulation, but around technology as physically settled paper became digitally settled. And so we were looking at what were the technologies, and we wanted to make markets in that. So we said, what technology? So this is 2014, right? And so I had a team in Asia, a team in Europe, and the Asian team introduced me to blockchain and Bitcoin specifically. And as we were looking at it, we made 6 investments in 2015. I was very enamored of blockchain and what it could do around the commuting of trust in the state of data at a given moment that fed a calculation for us to understand as we trade assets on chain. And so in 2016, I proposed to the family that they put low 9 figures into a company going into blockchain. They said no. And so that's the origins of Inventi. So I bought the research vehicle from them in late 16. In May of 17, we had a fully functioning tokenization platform. In late 2017, about a week after the Delaware law was passed, we tokenized the first common equity. We were a couple days after T0 tokenized their preferred equity. We did the first debt deal, the first debt deal we believe on chain, $3 million arm's length transaction, February 18th. And what we realized is as we were doing these trades, they knew people could buy them working in the offices. And the reason was their accountants would qualify their opinions if they held anything that was digitally native to a ledger. And so we said, hey, we did about $100 million of trades in 18. And we said we've got to really go backwards, away from kind of the front end of trading, structuring and trading, and back to the accounting treatment, better data, proof of state of data, proof of origin data, proof of process of data that people can use in order to get better accounting treatment, better understanding of collateral, and then that's where we really have been focusing. So everything from the assets to the tokens, if that makes sense.
Exactly. No, that's really quite interesting. And like my follow-up question is when was you think the aha moment, okay, blockchain is the technology, blockchain is the thing that will revolutionize finance? When do you think this hit you?
So, I remember I was doing a talk at a Bitcoin conference in Miami in 2015, and I was one of the few people who had traditional finance background at that conference. And one of my panelists, I remember saying, and I was very excited about what I saw coming on the horizon, which I thought would come much faster than it has. They said, smart contracts and blockchain and the ability to have programmable money and color coins will do away with the need for sovereign governments. And I thought we're still going to need bridges, right? That might be a step too far, but when you bring programmability into the ability to store value. And you have a variable beyond just floating point or decimalization in Bitcoin, right? But where you have multiple variables, how people save money in an inflation protected manner is really transformational to the roles that banks have played really for the last, let's call it 600 years, right? Before that, it's really historically a little bit different. And so I thought this is just going to be a seismic shift in how the global financial markets trade, how you store value, how you save value, how you spend. And this is an explosion beyond just what Bitcoin does, but really how capital markets are going to operate as we begin to layer in all of the functionality of the compute into store of value. And my big aha moment was when I said, okay, we need to understand this, not where the financial instrument is going and hitting one referenceable database, but that financial instrument can surveil any data system in the world, and the blockchain can prove the transmission of data from multiple different systems. So when you have AI and agents that are actually going out and getting data from one place or another, you're going to be able to use blockchain to prove context attribution and trust of source data that feeds an instrument that represents a piece of the capital stack of a portfolio or a single asset or whatever it might be, or a fund. And at that point, store of value is going to change so dramatically. That's really when I said this whole decentralization is, and Ethereum really is the decentralization of data that connects to compute on what is on that decentralized ledger.
It's a really interesting perspective. To follow up on that, like we always try to make a distinction between a crypto as a currency and the blockchain as financial or like as the general infrastructure. How do you see crypto plays a role within your narrative? How does it position within your infra?
So I think the people who talk about blockchain, not crypto, are really naive.
Yep.
And I think that they don't understand that stablecoin and crypto per se as a mechanism is the first mass adopter of blockchain technology at scale. And please excuse me, I'm at LaGuardia Airport, so there's my fair share of flying insects. So at any rate, the intersection between crypto and particularly alternatives, the ability to trade 24/7, 365 Bitcoin has sent shockwaves through every financial institution in the world. And to understand the speed by which you move money, and you're getting every major bank in the world, whether it's JP Morgan, whether it is Citi, whether it is Goldman, whether it is MasterCard, one of our partners, really understanding the speed with which you can transfer value through their stable coins or proof of liability, and that transfer that is instantaneous with settlement.
Yep.
And finality is enormous. But really the next real step is, I say that if you think about crypto and you think about stablecoin, store of value, when we're talking about the ability to trade maybe the underlying or maybe the derivative of a real asset. And when you transfer ownership of a real asset, it's difficult, right? There's all sorts of tax consequences, etc. But when you start talking about derivatives and commercial real estate derivatives and infrastructure derivatives, or you're talking about the ability to trade within the corporate SPVs that own pieces of the capital stack, that's going to be transformational. And to not understand that my real estate fund that was a 7-year fund that's now going to be an interval fund, and that interval fund that has daily subscriptions and weekly redemptions, and that's going to trade in and out, it's going to have an AMM, automatic market making function. To not understand that that's going to trade in a perpetual futures contract or a perp, where the other side is a stable coin. And if you try and distinguish and say, oh, it's different than crypto, you just don't even understand what the future of money is going to look like and how we're going to trade value in 10 years. So the connectivity and the connection is 100% an absolute.
Exactly. I appreciate saying that. Because you brought stable coins, maybe it's different that it's a whole new topic, but like I would love to pick your brain a bit on stable coins, B2B, yield earning ones. Like I think this is the most revolutionary thing stable coins in money markets have done today. What are your thoughts on like B2B payments when it comes to stable coins? Like when businesses have high volumes, high number of payments, the money is sitting in the bank, maybe mutual funds, yes, they exfoliate. It's like we're talking about DeFi, this sounds here. What are your thoughts on that? Uh,
So I, I have a lot of thoughts about it, and I want to start with disclaimers that I'm neither a lawyer nor a securities lawyer, right? That what I'm gonna talk about this from an economics
Yes,
standpoint.
exactly.
And we also need to understand that the economic incarnation looks different jurisdiction to jurisdiction, right? There is no way to understand an economic trade in a cross-border deal without understanding the two different jurisdictions, right? And so to think that you're going to have an omni-jurisdictional asset that trades in every way in every jurisdiction exactly the same way is naive. And so what we need to understand is that stablecoin and yield-producing assets and the role that banks play, where you put your paycheck every 2 weeks in, auto deposit into a bank, where you're taking hedge fund-like risk with nominal yield, is a trade that's not going to go on much longer. And one of the things that Invenium doing with one of our new partners, we have a new partner, G42, in the Middle East. They own the largest commercially available supercomputer in the world, Inception, that every OpenAI, ChatGPT inference is done on their tool. And using that type of compute power in a fully distributed structure where you have the ability to control your data, allow for it to be indexed behind your own firewall, embed the vector data behind your firewall, but then it use the compute of AI real time. You can allow structuring, you can allow querying, you can feed valuation models, waterfall carry calculations for daily computation of a real world asset like an office building, an infrastructure asset, a private equity asset. And as you do that, you're going to be able to trade these real world assets. And the piece of the capital stack of a real world asset like a multifamily housing or light industrial or commercial real estate, kind of excluding some of the issues, macro issues in that marketplace because of a return to work issue and overvaluation, but where somebody can say, I want to own a piece of the preferred equity, not necessarily even the debt of this, kind of the most senior cash flow off of a portfolio of real assets versus owning a piece of a yield-bearing account that has a huge expense ratio over it, has massive leverage of a bank. All of a sudden, you just say, "Hey, I'm going to have a senior piece." That interest calculation or that pref calculation can be done by the second. You know what I mean? And it's credited to your account by the second. All of a sudden, you say, "This is a whole new world on how we're going to structure assets, how we're going to store our value." And then you do something with a daily, where you all of a sudden you have these daily subscriptions and weekly redemptions, and then you clear that out. You attach that to a MasterCard, and suddenly you have the ability to store your value in performing assets that are inflation resistant. That it's going to bring liquidity to a lot of places. It's going to change how people can manipulate currencies. It's going to change how people save money, transfer value, manage risk. And so it really is these yielding assets. As just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal had an article talking about how the single asset, single borrower, 260 billion of bonds are in trouble because many of them have these large trophy assets that are non-performing right now. And so when that non-performing asset defaults, suddenly there's just huge risk. And as a lot of the big banks are absorbing some of this loss because they own a piece or they're a large part of the leveraging there, suddenly if that banking pipeline of credit slows down, that doesn't mean that there's not people who need to borrow, and that also doesn't mean there's not depositors who need to lend. It's just going to come up with a new mechanism to lend into that. And this is where DeFi has an opportunity to take over yield-bearing assets for the institutional and retail, investor who wants that yield-bearing instrument. And that yield-bearing instrument may be a debt instrument, it may be a pref instrument. But the other thing that it's going to do is, it's because it's available. Once it's available, soon it will be demanded, right? And so I think about proof of reserves and liabilities that you have, where in a lot of the crypto exchanges, they have proof of reserve and liability that they give every 5 seconds, and they rebalance all the accounts every 5 seconds. Some of the biggest people like Binance, they just point to a big account and say there's $1 billion, right? But the others, the smaller ones, they have to have that balancing every 5 seconds of proof of reserve and liability. Proof of reserve and liability for banks is every quarter with an OCC or an FDIC auditor coming in. Yeah. The technology is now there with Invenium plus some of these AI tools to literally be revaluing collateral every day. But banks aren't going to say, oh, I want to prove my reserves and liabilities match every day, because they like that opacity. GPs like that data asymmetry. So you know who's going to adopt it first? DeFi protocols. And as DeFi protocols come, they're going to be able to prove reserve and liability, and there's real world assets there. This suddenly is when you're going to have the adoption, and the individual investor is going to say, why wouldn't I invest for a 6 or 7% real yielding DeFi structure versus some of these kind of juiced up 18% yields that are stupid and not real, but that you can actually see with transparency. Here's the underlying piece of the capital stack I have. Here's the 2 or 3 third-party marks that I get monthly. Here's the AVM. Here's the proof of reserve and liability that's done every day. And suddenly that's going to change banking. It's going to change how we store value. And that this yielding piece, it is the future.